Al Jazeera's senior political analyst Marwan Bishara is joining us now. I'd like to talk about how this bypassed Congress, Marwan, in a moment. But first, is there something to be said over the timing of this particular deal, considering what's happening on the ground and the Israelis widening their offensive and seemingly focusing a lot now on the south and on Khan Yunis?
Oh, yes, there's no doubt about that. The Netanyahu government has decided to widen the war. It is fighting all over Gaza now. They say there's no place safe in Gaza. There's no place where there's no war in Gaza. So you can imagine that the Israelis are bombing every possible target in Gaza, including those places where Palestinians have taken refuge. Apparently, now for a good number of weeks, the Israelis have been bombing places where Palestinians took refuge, which is, kind of incredulous in so many ways. But if you allow me just to put this all in historical context, because I've been listening to the figures you're giving, and they are accurate in the sense of they are to the letter. I've seen estimates about how Israel has received between 150 to 250 billion dollars from the United States since 1967, because it depends how you count, right? Or it depends your accounting. I'll give you just one simple example. When you give aid to Israel, as an American, gives donations to Israel, to an Israel-associated charity, it's tax deductible in the United States. Mm-hmm. You can imagine the number of, say, American Jews or American Zionists, American evangelical Christians who donate to charities that work in Israel. It all becomes tax deductible in the United States. That's just one way of looking at it. But I've seen estimates that are unprecedented in international relations since international relations became a thing 5 centuries ago. No two other states have exchanged as much aid, meaning the United States to Israel, in modern international relations. It doesn't exist. And after 2014, when Ukraine became a bit in trouble, in hot water with Russia, from 2014 to 2020, Ukraine is a few times bigger than Israel. It got a fraction of the aid that America gave to Israel than that one America gave to Kyiv at the time for many years. So the nature of the U.S.-Israel relations is unique in human history. The nature of the aid that Israel gets, notably military aid from the United States, is unique in modern international relations. The fact that most of it could be spent in Israel, not in the United States, is unique in American aid, military aid to other countries. Because most military aid or financial aid gets to be spent in the United States. Like, for example, if I went to Egypt, right? But Israel, no, it's a whole other situation. So when we look at the figures now and we look at what's happening in the sense of Israel's unraveling genocide in Gaza, you still ask the question, so why today Israel is rushing aid to Egypt? So Biden, for many years, because, he was in the Senate for something like 40 years or something. He's been in Washington since 1972, 50 years. So for many years, he's been saying, if Israel did not exist, we would have had to create it. Yeah. Because Israel serves our interest in the Middle East. So maybe that was true in the 1980s. We don't have time to discuss it now. Or in the 1990s, or even the year 2000, maybe. But where exactly is the national interest today when Israel is no longer a strategic asset, presumed strategic asset, but it's a strategic liability? Israel cannot even win a war against a militia, basically, a resistance group in Gaza that was under siege for 17 years.
Right.
So certainly Israel is no longer a military asset. It's a military and a strategic burden on the United States.
Well, I mean, it's not just the aid that the U.S., as you're saying, continues to give Israel, but in this particular case, and for the second time in a month, the Biden administration is willing to bypass Congress to give them this aid. How are we to explain that? And what's the end game here for the U.S.?
Well, clearly, this is politically suspect, and I think there are going to be a lot of criticism of that in Washington, twice in a month to bypass Congress, to give aid to a country that's basically is involved in war crimes, if not genocide. And clearly the idea that this is self-defeating in the sense that America has a strategy that is built on the idea that Israel needs to exit the war as we know it today to another phase 3, what is less intensive. And yet it's giving it arms that serves its phase 2, which is supposed to leave, right? So it doesn't make no sense whatsoever. And we spoke about how morally defect, how morally scandalous this thing is. So the only explanation that I have is that the Biden administration is so boxed in behind the Netanyahu government. It can no longer see the, what do you call that, the woods from the tree, right? It's clearly stuck behind Netanyahu's schedule, Netanyahu's agenda, Netanyahu's personal ambition, Netanyahu's end game in Gaza, and it is unable to break away from that, at the risk of alienating Middle Eastern allies, its own public opinion. I would even go further, at the risk of losing the election. Biden could lose the election in 2024 because he's so stubborn of risking his administration, his legacy, at that of a known liar, basically, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Look, very broad question for our last question, Marwan, but we've just gotten the latest figures from the health ministry in Gaza, and they're saying that so far 21,672 Palestinians have been killed and 56,165 have been wounded. That's since October the 7th. Where do things go to from here? I mean, we hear that there could be some proposal on the table, unofficial reports, of course. I mean, what's going to happen?
My sense is that we might have something in the new year. We might have some kind of a deal. I think both Israel and Hamas needs a deal at this point in time, and I think that would definitely be supported by the United States. Israel might need it because Israel is running out of targets to hit in Gaza. It's running out of targets. After tens of thousands of bombings of different locations in Gaza, sooner or later this Khan Yunis thing is going to end, and what's next? I think the Biden administration, as we've been saying, also needs something, some respite from this genocide that's unraveling in front of the entire international public opinion. So they might reach a deal. This deal could be somewhere in between what Israel insists on and what Hamas insists on, a third way, a compromise of sorts. But I think Israel would want to continue with the war regardless. So it might take a break for a week or 2 or 3, take a rest from the bombing, from the killing of children, possible, in return for dozens of captives. Hamas would also benefit from that because it needs some kind of respite as well.
What about their plans to, in their own words of some Israeli officials, to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, push them out?
That's happening de facto because Gaza is becoming increasingly unlivable. I've just read a report by a scientist who refers to other scientists saying that if the situation continues as we know it today, all things being equal, a quarter of the population of Gaza could die out of disease. A quarter of the population. I cannot get my mind around the idea of one child dying. What does it mean, really? One child dying for no reason whatsoever other than political power and ambition, right? And now we're talking about a quarter of the population in Gaza at the risk of dying from diseases, not the bombing, diseases. All things being equal, and if the situation continues as it is today.
All right, thank you so much, Marwan Bishara. Thank you.